Thanks so much, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. In America, 40 million people live in poverty. Many of those millions have children or are children, and those children are attempting to get an education. The new documentary, Hungry to Learn, directed by Geeta Gandbhir and executive produced by Soledad O'Brien, tells the story of a number of students trying to get a college degree while at the same time figuring out how to eat. Let's take a look.
Some people are coming here and they're not even making ends meet. They can barely afford the tuition.
I don't have a meal plan, so I can't eat on campus unless I'm going out of pocket.
They started making fun of the fact that I was homeless. From then, I didn't want to tell anyone.
I'm not just the only one that has to use the resource that we have on campus because it's hard. It definitely is hard.
I got an email the other day, basically this is how much money you owe now. Is it worth it?
This is a systemic problem, and it's bigger than any one of us. Every time I give a public lecture, a student comes up to me afterwards and says, I didn't know you knew.
I'm gonna be paying back loans for the rest of my life. You gotta spend this much money to eat.
There are definitely moments of panic when it's about 4 o'clock and you realize I haven't eaten anything all day.
The federal government and the folks all the way at the tippy top might be trying to ignore it. The rest of us aren't.
Please rise if you currently serve students experiencing food insecurity.
Being class president, I feel like, is what kind of pushed me to stand out in a positive way. Be like a positive representative.
Saving was always difficult, so it's not like we had a pot for them for college.
Now that I'm educating myself and I'm learning about food insecurity, I'm learning that this isn't right.
We have to do better than this because it is our moral obligation to do better than this for all these young people who simply want an education, something that this country has always held dear.
The thought of giving up always crossed my mind. I don't know if I can make this work anymore. Some days where I'm just like, is college for me?
It would be easier to drop out of college than to be hungry in college. So because people can't fully pay the price of college, they have a very strong likelihood of ending up with nothing except debt. It's gonna hurt us for generations.
Everybody, please welcome Soledad O'Brien and Geeta Gandbhir. Let's hear it. Hi.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making this documentary a necessary, important documentary that I don't think about a story that a lot of people don't know about. We know that 40 million people are homeless in this country. We never talk about what those homeless people are trying to do with their lives. And I think that is fascinating. Just to say, some are trying to get a college degree. They're not all just homeless. They have aspirations. They have things that they want to do. What is it like for them to try to do these things while homeless? How did this begin for the two of you? How did you even come up with the idea to start talking about this?
It started for us as a statistic to see that there was such a large number of students who were food insecure. And I think a lot of people always thought, well, we know there's some students who are struggling and there's a handful, who are really having a hard time making ends meet. But when you actually started to look at the data, and Sarah, in our documentary, the professor started compiling data and saying that it's not a small number, it's actually a giant number. And through the process of the doc, she actually starts doing a survey that will show almost half of the students on CUNY campuses are hungry, experience food insecurity. So we thought the data point was interesting, and we basically begged Geeta to come on board. She's a very well-known documentarian, so we're like, you have 79 million other projects, but please do our project, because we knew it needed to be focused around amazing young people, and the storytelling would be essential.
I just have to say there wasn't much begging.
Groveling, really, would be the word.
Soledad O'Brien calls you to work on a project, you answer. It's not something you turn down easily. And also the topic was so meaningful and is so meaningful.
How difficult was it for you to find, the students that you have in the documentary are not just compelling, they are articulate and really resilient people. How hard was it to find them, to find 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds who are willing to share this story, which is so often, hidden behind a social stigma?
So I think, interestingly, it was challenging, not because there aren't so many of them. Again, as Soledad mentioned, the statistics are really high. 50% of students, at least on the campuses that we explored, experience food insecurity. Not all of the students in the film were homeless,
Yes,
but
excuse me.
absolutely, a huge number of them experience food insecurity. So I think for us, we thought it would be easy to find students who would come and talk to us and be willing to tell their stories. And interestingly, because of the stigma that is attached to food insecurity and homelessness and poverty in general in this country, it was challenging. A lot of these students experience deep shame around the issue. They don't necessarily want to tell their stories. They feel ashamed to ask for help, and that is something that, again, has been ingrained in them. And oftentimes they blame themselves for their situations, which is something that we hope to change with the narrative of this film.
Part of what the film talks about is that having a meal plan at a school, at a school costs an exorbitant amount of money for some students. So that is an impossibility. I mean, we see that even in just the trailer. How often did you find with the students, between paying for tuition, whether they're on any kind of scholarship or not, that it was just not affordable for them to have any kind of meal plan?
I think that happens all the time. And I think what's happened in colleges, and right now I have one daughter who's a freshman and one who's heading off to school. So I've been touring colleges nonstop for the last 2 years. It's like an arms race, right? They take you to show you the football stadium. They show you the cafeteria. When I was in college, the cafeteria was a bunch of very nice little old ladies who slopped some stuff on your plate and you kept moving through. Now it's, well, there's a panini bar and then we have a sushi bar and we're negotiating now to get Chipotle to come in and set up. Colleges are making sure that they're offering that to students who, frankly, many of them want that. The problem becomes it's actually incredibly expensive. A sandwich costs $12, $13, not $1,
Like what I
$2.
pay for a sandwich is like
right.
a
Anybody in New
working
York
professional
City,
in New York City.
in
Yeah.
your job, right? You pop out and grab a sandwich. It's right. It's what we're paying.
I work for a living. I'm not spending my money to learn every day.
So it becomes incredibly problematic for a student to both afford the meal plan, they're very expensive, or if you're not on the meal plan and you're just trying to buy individual items, there's not much food that's cheap and easy to get access to. So you end up having students who just opt to not eat. And now with a pantry, I mean, what also was interesting was the number of colleges that have pantries, it's amazing, and thank God for pantries, and it's bad because it's a Band-Aid, right? I mean, you'd hate for people to think you have a solution because you have a pantry. You have a Band-Aid slapped on a very big problem. That's a systemic problem that a pantry, and again, thank you for the pantry, but I would hate for people to think that the pantry is a solution to what we're seeing.
Go back to what you were saying about the kind of arms race and the cafeterias turning into sushi bars and panini bars, because it's not just that the students want this, it's more advantageous for profit reasons for the schools essentially to partner with food providers who provide services like that. Is that correct? I mean, I believe that's a portion of the movie, right?
That is correct, and Sarah Goldrick-Rab, Professor Sarah Goldrick-Rab, talks about it in the film. It's a business model, and essentially it's very profitable for the food services. They make she mentions that they make enough money. Oftentimes, they can build a building on the campus, and within that, they can bring in places, as Soledad mentioned, like a Chipotle, or they can serve sushi, or they can basically bring in all kinds of amenities that some students enjoy. But again, for other students, it's expensive. And they will say to what we were told is by people who represented the food services is the cost of food goes up each year. It just it becomes more expensive. So, their hands are sort of tied and they try to provide a variety, but it's not enough.
And they're going to lose students, frankly, right? I mean, just like having a crappy football stadium, students come by and the ones who can afford it look and see and say, this is your cafeteria. They've got sushi over there. Listen, you are competing for a limited number of students, and especially those who can pay full fare. You need to serve them. And so that just becomes another element of what you can offer that makes your college more appealing than another college. It's a business model.
I love the professor of Russian literature here, but these pancakes are disgusting. I'm not going to this school.
You know what? Touring around with my daughter, she's like, Mom, a sushi bar. Right. I'm like, can we go look at the academic center again?
I think I forgot what it's like to be 18 a little bit, What is, I don't want to go so quickly get into the solutions, but so much of the problem seems to be privatization, and that these schools solely operate for the purpose of profit, and that higher education in this country has by and large become a private enterprise, even on the state level, even on the city level. The CUNY schools, you can kind of still see that. What is the solution to this in some ways? Making the schools a little less like private entities, like corporations?
I actually think that that's not the main issue. The main issue is that we haven't really looked at this group of people and said, how do we feed them? There's lots of policies that help people who can't afford to eat. And you could, for example, give people food stamps, which would give you money for food. Students now have to work 20 hours a week in order to be able to get on SNAP or food stamps. That's a lot of hours if you're a student who's trying to keep up. And
shouldn't being a student already be considered working in some respects?
Exactly.
Exactly. And so it doesn't necessarily have to just be, hey, you know, you guys need to lower your rates. It could also be, don't we have a policy that should help people who are hungry? And how can we fit students in and make sure that we're not just burdening them more with more work hours? I mean, Izzy in our doc, she was working 80 hours a week and was a full-time student at one point.
How do you change the narrative and the conversation around SNAP and food stamps in this country? For 3 decades now, I mean, you have the footage of Reagan talking about the federal government not paying for students. How do you change the narrative in this country that those who are on food stamps or need food stamps in order to get by are not milking the system, are not I don't want to say welfare because that was just like a racist narrative that was created for an extended period of time, but are not milking the system simply because they're quote unquote lazy?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is that students are a perfect place to start to change the narrative, because these are young people who are doing everything right. They're doing everything that they are told they should to try to achieve a higher education, you know, so that they can become participating citizens in a society, so they can pay taxes, so they can get jobs, so they can again, sort of participate in the American dream. And so I think with this film, you know, one of the things we're hoping to show is that is again to change the narrative, that false narrative that's been built around who is in need of food stamps and who is in need of support. The cost of college has escalated essentially 90-something%, I believe it's 95% over the last 30 years. So that has gone up, whereas the income level of families has stagnated. So this disparity is tremendous. And there is a huge stigma around anyone asking for support, any kind of social support. And I think that is something that we have to change. Students are a perfect place to look at that narrative and hopefully turn it on its head.
And listen, I'm a member of the media, but I think the media carries the water for some. Are we allowed to curse on this show?
Oh yeah, please.
Bullshit narratives
especially
all
when
the
we're talking
time,
about
right?
the
And one
media.
completely bullshit narrative, right, is this tisk, tisk, tisk. Oh, you need food stamps? And I think sometimes you have to really push back and call people out on these malignant and flawed and just wrong narratives, right? Welfare queen. You know how many people in the news use that term, historic? A lot.
It was used for decades.
And people never would say, like, I'm going to stop you there because that's some bullshit and we're not going to be okay with it. And I think that you're actually seeing in the course of this doc some of these young people who start off as embarrassed college students. I mean, Shaquara, when we started, I said, she doesn't really speak. This might be problematic for our dialogue. She doesn't talk. By the end, she delivers the most impassioned, it will make you bawl. She's amazing. She's an amazing young woman. And some of it is she came around to, it's not me. It's not me. It's a system that's unfair. Yeah. And I think the more that we can sort of bring people to see, like, there's a systemic problem that needs to be solved, that you can't slap a Band-Aid on and you can't tisk your way out of it. And we can push back on media narratives and just say, you're wrong, it's not okay. I think you see a real transformation for these young people in this documentary as they begin to figure out, like, it's not us. It's not us. It's a system that's completely screwed up.
There is also there is a movement among students, and Sarah Goldrick-Robb again has sort of spearheaded it. She has a event that she titles Real College, that where every year where students and advocates and professors and people from sort of all walks of this world come together to try to find solutions, and there are solutions that they are coming up with. So the solutions exist, and there is this movement that's growing to sort of to actually take action to alleviate this issue. So I think it's about also listening to them and listening to those voices. They are featured in the film. But there's movement on the ground that's happening. We just really have to pay attention and tap into it.
There's a young woman in our doc, very professional-looking young woman, and she says, I was a student who needed breakfast and lunch at school. What do you think happened to students like me who get free breakfast and free lunch? Where do you think we went? We went off to college, but nobody then tries to figure out how to get you food in college. We'll help those students in those Title I schools that need that kind of support. Do we think they all just disappeared when it was time for them to go to college? Of course not. They went, and they're trying to figure out now how to eat.
I want to go back to the media narratives just for a second, because when we're talking about...
I won't curse anymore, I promise.
No, you're more than welcome to. I enjoy
My children are always so embarrassed. They're like, oh, Mom, stop cursing.
Do it.
This idea that like telling this story could turn the narrative on its head, and I feel like in a logical world that would happen because it's true. But we live
Saying
in
we
this
don't live in a logical world?
No, because it's not just media narratives anymore and stereotypical narratives. It's people getting paid to come on these networks and say things that are inflammatory and reactionary and totally outrageous and make no sense. Like I can already hear the right-wing narrative to what you're saying being like, you're just using this to buy beer. And it's like the people that you have in the documentary who are clearly not using it to buy beer, but they would say that and they would, roused up a bunch of other people to say that, and they would get put on the air for that. Do you worry about that? You're making political documentaries in a way. You're making documentaries to change the narrative, but we live in this time where the narrative feels consistently illogical. Do you ever consider that and worry about that?
It's interesting. I've been doing this for a long time.
Deeply cynical, I'm sorry.
No, and it's fine to be that way, but you really can't worry about it. There is no room to worry about it because the stakes are that high. I think if we worried about it, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, right? There's no...
I almost didn't make it.
Yeah.
And it's not even just change the narrative. It's to... And TV news shows aren't the only platforms, right? So... a lot of it for me is you give voice to a different story. I feel like we've been slamming our heads against the wall of that for many decades now between us, right? Of just, it's not, my version over your version. It's, here's a story about a student you haven't heard before. Because it's never had a place, but we can give it a place. We can give it a place. This will air. We're going to do our theatrical premiere for anybody who's in New York this weekend or on Monday who wants to come and watch it.
NYC, right?
At Doc NYC. And then we'll have a conversation afterwards that I'll moderate, and then we'll distribute it and we'll sell it so that it airs. And then at some point, some of these issues will air on the show that I do, which is a syndicated show called Matter of Fact, right? So it's really about just saying, like, there's another version, and we're going to continue to give that other voice a platform and elevate it and not change the narrative, but show that there is another version. I think that's a really big step.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you that cable news is not the only way that people get news. I
can't believe I'm less of a downer than you on this topic. And I'm sometimes very distressed about the whole thing.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of those right-wing narratives, you recently called out CNN for hiring someone that you didn't see as particularly fit to be an on-air or a pundit,
That's
if you will.
Many words to say Sean Duffy is a hot mess. Yes.
Is that because...
Come on, he is. That's not even out there. That's just a fact. The anchors were on the air, literally, like, stepping back from what their new colleague was saying. Right. When you're doing that, that's a fail. I know, I have done that before. You're like, this is bad. Hi, welcome to the network. And also, I need to point out all the ways in which you just said something terrible. That's not good.
Is it different, though? Because, you used to be at the network, and you used to have pundits there, and those would be...
not as many.
You would have right-wing pundits and left-wing pundits, and they would crosstalk, and they would have arguments, and they would push their narratives.
You didn't have what they have now, which I think is to set up this versus that fighting, right? What Sean Duffy said was despicable about this gentleman who was testifying, and completely without evidence at all, right? And also, we didn't have people who were hired by the network who were saying that kind of stuff, who were on specifically in order to be kind of bomb throwers into the conversation. But we actually had a very strong standards and practices team.
Right,
They
he
would
wouldn't
never
be asked back.
he wouldn't be asked back, right? He'd be gone. But also, you would be hauled into standards and practices. 1 year, there was a rumor that I had donated money to a political campaign, and it was a woman named Soledad, but her last name was Vega. And it was like a whole entire and I had to sit down and be like, I am not Soledad Vega. I did not. But there was a real sense of watching what your anchors did and said to make sure that you were controlling kind of how the platform operated. It's more of a free-for-all now. And so, yeah, I think that's problematic. And I think that when you're paying someone who's saying despicable things, that's hugely problematic. I like experts. You know, the show we do, if you're not an expert in climate change, you don't get to come on the air and talk about climate change. If you're not an expert in science, you don't get to talk about science. It's not brain surgery. It's just giving the platform to experts. If you're a young person who's hungry, you are an expert, and you get a voice as much as somebody else who's been studying the issue for 25 years.
Do you think that, last news question, sorry. Do you think that...
I love the news, by the way. It's just a mess right now. It really is.
Do you think that because of the way in which it is a mess, the impeachment hearings and the proceedings are going away, the wrong way, or are going a certain way because the news doesn't actually know how to cover them with legitimacy?
How many viewers do you think a primetime show on CNN has? Give me a guess.
It's like 1 million, if that, right?
Yeah, right. So that's not many people. What will decide it is the legal process.
Right.
Really. It's not going to be a situation where we're just going to try to convince as many people as possible.
Even Fox News, which we give a ton of, I think we give way too much weight to, only has like maybe 1 million, 1.5.
Exactly. So what's really going to matter are what is the testimony and what do the judges say in the testimony, which is interesting because the president's actually appointed now a quarter of all federal judges. That gets so much less coverage, and that's actually super duper important.
Mm-hmm.
The other fluff and froth is far less important. But you know, that's what gets the I think the cable news narrative kind of off and running every day. It's why I'm really glad I don't do a live show anymore.
Yeah, I'm sure you are, right? I mean, you get to actually plan and strategize and think about goals that you want for your show and what you want to cover. You don't have to just go in and be like, whoa, what's going on?
Good morning. The president tweeted last night. Here's what he said. We don't do that anymore.
We have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question? Right here.
Hello.
Hey.
So I really appreciate this film. I'm a new college student, and talking about food insecurity is actually like really big part of the conversations I'm having with my peers, and also And so my question is, did you ever like encounter a university or a model that actually was positive and helped kids with food insecurity? And what was that model?
That's such a great question, actually. And I think right now most of the universities that we've been talking to are trying to figure it out. First of all, step one, they didn't even know how many students they had. I think that they were part of this idea of like, yeah, there's always a handful. And then when you check the numbers, it's actually far more, right? People don't want to talk about it, so you don't know. So I think those universities have then moved into, well, you know what, we're going to get a food pantry. And if you look, the number of colleges that have food pantries is just a massive growth in that. And when you're touring a school, they'll tell you very proudly, we have a food pantry for our students who are struggling. I think the third phase is the one where you say the system is not okay. And I have not seen a university that has been able to kind of change the system, because I don't think it's a one-off university at a time change. I think we have to really think about how we help students. And it's part of the conversation about school debt. I mean, all of the students, Shaquara's going to left school with $10,000. She's homeless. $10,000 in debt. Izzy will leave school with $30,000 to $60,000 in debt. It's insane. So it's all part of that same conversation. So I think colleges are making some positive steps, but I don't think they're close to the answer yet.
I do think, though, that you, as a college student, it's the onus is on you to demand also what works for you. You need to, you and your friends and anyone else who's part of sort of this movement, you need to raise your voices as much as you can and tell them what is needed. You know, because I think a lot of times, like as Soledad mentioned, colleges are struggling to address this. They don't know how, but college students often know what is needed and what would help them.
One more?
Hi, I have a question from our website. Hi, I'm a college student with literally no spending money, but I feel guilty going to food kitchens because I'm not houseless, and it feels like even though I'm struggling, others have it worse than me. How do I shake this?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, God bless that person, right? What an amazing person. And we actually saw that in our scholars as well. I'll tell you, Izzy is going to come in and stay in my apartment this weekend for the screening. And I said to her, well, so what kind of food do you need? And she said, bananas and tea would be fine. Right. I'm like, and how about some food? You know, but because there's so much shame, right? This idea of ask for what you need. So that student needs to say, here's the food I need to be healthy and focus in my classes every single day and have no shame about that. That's what the food pantry is there for. And that student should absolutely go and ask for it. And then I think the payback, if there's such a thing, is to say, and I'm going to be willing to talk about it and tell people, I'm the kind of student who needs this. Thank you for these donations. We need a better system, right? There's a way to pay it back. The answer is not to not take the food. The answer is to be a voice for maybe other people who don't feel like they can speak up. So don't have shame. That doesn't buy anybody anything. Stand up and say, I'm one of a number of students, and I need more than a food pantry. I need actual food, 3 meals a day, like normal people eat, without it being a big deal. I think that's really important. But bless that person. But go get some food, truly.
And just to add to that, I mean, and that it's deserved. It's not something that, you know, you're meant to earn in life. It's a right. You should have access to food. You should have access to running water and electricity and a roof over your head. I mean, that is just, you know, those are basic human needs. So there's nothing wrong with it. And I think, yeah, just to echo Soledad, absolutely becoming a voice. The more we all speak up about this issue, the less of a stigma there will be.
Thank you.
Geeta, Soledad, congratulations on Hungry to Learn. Thank you so much for coming here and talking to me about it.
Thank you for having me.
And making it. And Monday, right? Doc NYC, it's
Doc
premiering?
NYC Saturday as
Saturday,
well, and we're
excuse
going to have a panel, and then I'll also be there on Monday for the screening, and we'll take any questions that people have as well.
Amazing.
Because it's right in NYC where I live, so we are going to be there.
Everybody give Geeta and Soledad a round of applause for being here. Let's hear it.